The call came while I was 40 ft underwater. Your son is dead. 10 years old in a wheelchair, shot by our neighbor over grass length. She killed my boy and smiled in court. I'm a Navy SEAL. I know 100 ways to get justice. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The neighborhood of Westwood Pines had always carried an unsettling silence, a polished, eerie calm that seemed less like peace and more like suppression. Behind its white fences and trimmed lawns, conformity ruled like an unspoken law. And at the center of that rule stood the Homeowners Association, led by one woman whose name inspired both fear and resentment, Karen Whitmore. Karen wasn't elected. She seized power through intimidation and control. Her word was law, her complaints scripture. Every mailbox height, every paint shade, every lawn length all fell under her sharp, watchful eyes. She was a tyrant dressed in pearls, wrapped in self-righteousness, fueled by the thrill of power. At the end of Cedar Lane stood a modest brick house, older, smaller, and different. The Jenkins family had moved in 3 months ago, choosing the quiet suburbs to start over. Ethan Jenkins, a boy of 12, lived there with his father Michael Jenkins, a retired Navy SEAL. Ethan was born with a severe physical disability, confining him to a wheelchair. Despite his challenges, he radiated light. His laughter, though rare, filled the neighborhood like sunlight breaking through clouds. But to Karen, difference was disorder. The ramp built along the porch, the adapted van in the driveway, the faded blue paint on the mailbox, each was an offense to her picture-perfect kingdom. She had issued warnings, letters, fines, all ignored. To her, it wasn't about the rules anymore. It was about control and punishment. On that Sunday morning, Ethan waited alone on the porch. His father had gone to town to pick up groceries, leaving him under the warm autumn sun. The neighborhood was silent except for the rustle of dry leaves. The air smelled faintly of pine and gasoline. Across the street, Karen stood watching, her arms folded, her lips tight with disapproval. She had seen it again, the ramp, that unsightly wooden structure she claimed violated HOA guidelines. She muttered about property values, aesthetics, and special treatment. Beneath her words lay something darker, a festering hatred of anything that reminded her she wasn't in complete control. That morning she made a decision she could never take back. Karen stormed across the street, her heels striking the pavement like gunfire. She had called the city before, filed complaints, none had worked. Now she told herself she'd handle it personally. She moved past the no trespassing sign, up the porch steps, and began shouting. Ethan froze, startled, scared, helpless. Her words were venom. She pointed at the ramp, calling it illegal, non-compliant, an eyesore. And then her rage escalated. Neighbors later recalled hearing a crash, the sound of splintering wood, and a scream, short and sharp, cut off by silence. When they looked outside, they saw Karen standing at the base of the porch, her face pale, her hands trembling, and Ethan's wheelchair overturned beside the broken ramp. The boy lay motionless. For a moment, Karen didn't move. Then panic twisted into something else, fear of consequence. She looked around, saw curtains shifting, people watching. She fled, muttering something about an accident. But the truth was clearer than daylight. She had pushed too far, both literally and morally. The ambulance arrived 6 minutes later, but it was too late. Ethan Jenkins was pronounced dead on the scene. By the time the first police car pulled up, a black pickup truck was already speeding down the street, its tires screeching against the asphalt, the engine roaring like a storm breaking loose. Inside was Michael Jenkins. The call from dispatch had been fragmented, words drowned by static. Your son accident, ramp collapse. He hadn't even parked the car when he saw the crowd, the flashing lights, the yellow tape. His training had prepared him for war zones, ambushes, chaos, but nothing could prepare a father for this. He ran to the porch, his breath shallow, his heart pounding in his ears. When he saw Ethan's small body covered with a white sheet, something inside him broke, not loudly but completely. The kind of break that leaves no sound, no tears, only silence and a darkness that begins to move. The neighbors stood frozen, afraid to meet his eyes. They all knew what had happened. They all knew who had done it. But no one spoke. Karen had already retreated to her house, drawing her blinds, locking her door, convincing herself she was innocent. Michael stood there for a long time, his hands trembling, his mind replaying every moment, the laughter that morning, the promise he made to his son, the seconds he wasn't there. And then slowly the soldier in him began to surface, calm, cold, methodical. He turned to the police officer, his voice low but steady, and said only one thing before walking away: "I'll handle it." That night Westwood Pines didn't sleep. The sirens faded, the reporters left, and the silence returned, heavier this time, like the air before a storm. In the darkness of his garage, Michael Jenkins sat alone. His uniform hung nearby, the insignia of a Navy SEAL glinting faintly under the dim light. On the table lay a folded American flag, a photo of Ethan smiling in his chair, and a single note, an HOA violation letter signed by Karen Whitmore. He stared at the paper, then at the ramp outside, shattered, splintered, and stained. When he finally stood up, his eyes were different. Not of a man broken, but of one reborn with purpose, the kind of purpose that doesn't forgive, the kind that seeks justice not from law but from the shadows. Outside, the wind began to rise. The lights in Karen's house flickered as a storm rolled in from the west, and somewhere in the distance, a Navy SEAL began to prepare for war, not against nations, but against one woman who thought she was untouchable. The clock struck midnight. Michael Jenkins loaded his truck. Westwood Pines was about to learn that when you destroy a man's peace, you awaken his vengeance, and vengeance had just come home. The morning after Ethan's death, Westwood Pines awoke to the sound of nothing, not the chirping of birds, not the rumble of lawnmowers, not even the chatter of neighbors. The entire community felt suspended in the weight of what had happened. Curtains stayed drawn, conversations died in whispers, and the once pristine neighborhood began to feel like a stage set for guilt. At the end of Cedar Lane, Michael Jenkins sat alone in his garage. The air smelled of oil and steel. His son's wheelchair, dented, scraped, a silent witness, sat in the corner like a monument to everything that had been taken. Michael hadn't slept, he hadn't spoken. He just sat there motionless, staring at the broken ramp through the window, the morning sunlight falling across the splintered boards. He had seen death before. He had delivered it too, in deserts, jungles, and silent waters where only ghosts remembered what happened. But this was different. There was no enemy uniform, no mission objective, just a boy who never got to live long enough to understand cruelty. That morning, as he stood and unfolded the flag from his shelf, something in him shifted. The oath he had once sworn to protect, to serve, to never leave a brother behind began to burn again. But this time it wasn't for country, it was for Ethan. He whispered a promise into the silence, not to the government, not to the law, but to his son: justice by any means necessary. He began his preparations the way a SEAL always did, with patience, method, precision. Michael started with the HOA itself. Every HOA left a trail: minutes from meetings, financial ledgers, complaints logged in city records. He found them all. Late into the night, he combed through digital archives, public databases, property records. He mapped every officer, every homeowner, every connection. He wasn't just looking for Karen. He was tracing the machine that allowed her to operate, the people who covered her, the system that excused her. And what he found was uglier than he expected. Karen Whitmore wasn't just the president of the HOA, she was the HOA. Through years of manipulation, she'd installed her allies into every position that mattered. Her husband, Roger, handled the finances. Her neighbor, Deborah, served as compliance officer, the one issuing fines and warnings. Together, they ran the neighborhood like a miniature dictatorship, funneling HOA funds into personal projects and silencing dissent with threats of legal action. Michael realized quickly that this wasn't about one woman's cruelty, it was about power built on fear. And to destroy it, he couldn't just strike back, he had to dismantle it. That night, he began his quiet war. His first move was information control. He visited the houses of those who had seen what happened, the witnesses too scared to speak. He didn't threaten them. He didn't beg, he simply listened. And one by one they told him the same story: how Karen had been shouting at Ethan, how she'd pushed the wheelchair, how she'd panicked and fled. They were afraid to go public. "The HOA will bury us," one said. Michael didn't argue. He just nodded, his face unreadable. He left them knowing one thing: their silence wouldn't protect them for long. By the third day, Karen started to feel it. She woke up to find her mailbox ripped from the ground. Her car alarm went off at 3 a.m. without reason. Her motion lights flickered even when no one was there. The sense of safety she once bathed in began to decay piece by piece. It wasn't random vandalism, it was calculated pressure. Michael wanted her on edge, paranoid, afraid, because fear made people sloppy. Meanwhile, he began leaking pieces of what he'd found: HOA documents, financial discrepancies, screenshots to local journalists, anonymous tips, small at first, then heavier. The narrative began to shift. What had been called a tragic accident in the news now carried darker undertones. Negligence, cover-up, abuse of authority. The walls around Karen's kingdom began to tremble. At the HOA office, she called emergency meetings. She barked orders, demanded compliance, lashed out at anyone who questioned her. But fear spreads fast, and soon her loyal officers began turning on each other. Suspicion replaced unity. Michael watched from the sidelines. He wasn't acting out of rage, not anymore. This was strategy. He wanted Karen to feel what Ethan had felt: powerless. On the fifth night, a storm rolled through Westwood Pines. Thunder cracked like artillery. Rain lashed against windows. And in the middle of it, Karen heard something: footsteps outside her house. Slow, deliberate. She pulled back her curtain, heart pounding. Nothing, just the empty street shimmering under lightning. But on her porch lay something new. A small, folded flag. The kind handed to military families after a funeral. No note, no signature, just the flag, damp, heavy, silent. She screamed, called the police, demanded patrol cars to guard her street. But when they arrived, there was no sign of forced entry. No fingerprints, nothing. Only the quiet understanding among officers who knew Michael's reputation that if he wanted to be unseen, he would be. The next morning, the HOA received a mass email from an unknown sender. Attached were bank records, proof of embezzlement, copies of falsified permits, and internal memos signed by Karen herself. Within hours, the local news picked it up. The story exploded. The perfect neighborhood was exposed as a web of fraud and corruption. Karen's empire was burning from the inside out. Still, none of it brought Ethan back. None of it filled the empty chair at the kitchen table. Michael knew the war wasn't over. The HOA would crumble, yes, but Karen still breathed. She still walked free, calling lawyers, painting herself as a victim. The law might not touch her, but he would. As the sun set that evening, Michael stood on the porch where it all happened. The broken ramp was gone, replaced by an empty space and silence. The storm clouds above glowed orange with fading light. He looked down at the ground where Ethan had fallen, his jaw clenched, his heart steady. He whispered again the same promise he'd made the night before. This wasn't revenge, this was redemption, and he was just getting started. In the distance, Karen sat inside her home with the blinds drawn, clutching her phone, trembling at every sound. She told herself it was over, that she'd weather it, that the police would protect her. But Michael wasn't coming for her with anger. He was coming with truth, and truth he knew could destroy faster than bullets. Somewhere between grief and fury, a soldier's mind had found its mission again. And this time the battlefield was Westwood Pines. By the end of that week, Westwood Pines no longer looked like a model neighborhood. The pristine lawns that once shimmered under morning dew were now marred by tire tracks, uncollected trash, and newspaper headlines scattered across driveways. The illusion of perfection had shattered, and the cracks revealed everything Karen had worked so hard to hide. Michael Jenkins had started something irreversible. The story of Ethan's death, once buried under HOA spin, had resurfaced with a vengeance. The leaked documents, the anonymous tips, the whispered testimonies from frightened residents, all formed a storm of exposure that no PR firm or lawyer could contain. Local news vans parked outside the entrance of Westwood Pines, their cameras rolling as reporters pieced together a chilling picture of corruption, greed, and negligence. Karen's face, once the symbol of community order, was now plastered across every screen in the county. Her name had become a warning, a symbol of power abused, but Michael wasn't done. Every move he made was deliberate. Every rumor, every leak, every bit of chaos, it was part of his strategy to strip away her armor piece by piece. He wanted to corner her until she had nowhere left to hide. He began sending letters, not to Karen, but to every homeowner who had ever been fined, threatened, or humiliated by her. The letters contained copies of evidence proving that the HOA had been misappropriating their money. They weren't threats. They were truth, simple, undeniable, documented truth. Within days, Karen's loyal subjects turned on her. Neighbors who once nodded in obedience now shouted at her in the street. Angry crowds gathered at the next HOA meeting, demanding answers. They pounded on the doors of the clubhouse as Karen's inner circle, her husband, her treasurer, her compliance officer, scrambled to contain the outrage. The meeting descended into chaos. Voices rose, papers flew, and the air thickened with accusations. Someone called her a murderer. Someone else said she'd ruined the neighborhood. Karen tried to maintain control, her face flushed, her words trembling. But the people she once ruled now saw her for what she truly was, a tyrant built on lies. Michael watched it all from his truck parked at the edge of the cul-de-sac, silent and unmoving. Through the windshield, he saw the mob outside the clubhouse. He didn't smile, he didn't gloat, he simply observed, the way soldiers do when watching an enemy fortress crumble from within. But as the HOA imploded, a different kind of danger began to surface. Karen was desperate. She started calling in favors, old allies from City Hall, lawyers she'd blackmailed with donations, even a local sheriff who owed her husband a debt. The system that once ignored her corruption now began to stir again, this time to protect her. She told them she was being targeted, that she was a victim of military intimidation. She twisted every fact, every narrative, trying to paint Michael as an unhinged veteran, dangerous and unstable. By the third week, unmarked police cruisers began circling the Jenkins house at night. Drones hovered briefly over his backyard. Anonymous calls reported suspicious activity. It was clear the HOA's remnants were trying to push back, but Michael anticipated it. He left no evidence of his involvement, no traceable communications, no proof linking him to the leaks. Everything he did flowed like shadow, precise, surgical, unseen. And when local enforcement began to pry, they found nothing except a grieving father who had lost his only child. Still, Karen's fear deepened. She stopped attending public meetings. She shuttered her blinds, installed cameras, and had motion sensors covering her yard. She even tried to sell her house, but no one would buy it. The property's value had plummeted, its reputation poisoned by scandal. That's when Michael made his next move. He began reconstructing the ramp, slowly, piece by piece. Not as a memorial, but as a message. Every board nailed into place echoed through the neighborhood. The sound carried, hammer strikes echoing across silent streets, a haunting reminder of what had been broken. Neighbors watched from behind curtains, whispering. Some wanted to help, but none dared. They knew Karen would see it. She did. From her window, she could see Michael rebuilding the ramp she had destroyed, rebuilding it stronger, wider, anchored deep into concrete. It wasn't just a structure. It was defiance. That night, Karen lost control. She stormed out of her house under the cover of darkness, her flashlight cutting through the mist. She approached Michael's property like an intruder, her nerves raw, her mind unraveling. The ramp stood finished, illuminated by the soft glow of the porch light. And there at its base lay something she hadn't expected, a small wooden plaque. It read, "For Ethan, forever home." Her hands shook, her breath came fast, rage overcame reason. She screamed into the empty night, accusing him of harassment, terrorism, revenge. But no one came, her voice echoed unanswered. Across the street, Michael stood in shadow, watching, his face calm, his eyes hollow. He said nothing. The next morning, the police arrived again, called by Karen. But when they investigated, there was no violation, no threat, just a rebuilt ramp, perfectly legal, perfectly documented, perfectly untouchable. Michael had turned her own obsession with the law against her. By the end of that week, the HOA formally collapsed. The board resigned, the accounts were frozen, investigations began into financial misconduct, and several members, including Karen's husband, were subpoenaed. But even as her empire fell, Karen clung to the belief that she could survive. She filed restraining orders. She called news stations, trying to control the narrative. She painted herself as a grieving woman harassed by a deranged veteran. Some reporters even believed her, at least at first, until another leak surfaced. It was a video security footage from a neighbor's camera. The day Ethan died, it showed everything: her crossing the street, her shouting, the shove, the fall, the panic, the flight. The truth hit like a bomb. Overnight, Karen's life disintegrated. Protests formed outside her house. Reporters camped on her lawn. Her phone rang endlessly: death threats, hate mail, lawsuits. Even her friends turned away, and through it all, Michael remained silent. He didn't appear in interviews, he didn't seek attention, he simply watched, unseen, as justice, raw and inevitable, closed in. But he wasn't done yet, because what Michael wanted wasn't just public ruin. He wanted her to feel what Ethan had felt: isolation, helplessness, and fear, and soon she would. As the sun sank behind the neighborhood that once worshipped her, Karen sat alone in the dark, her lights off, her blinds drawn. Outside, the sound of a car engine echoed faintly. Slow, steady, familiar. Her heart froze. Through the gap in her curtains she saw it: the black pickup truck parked under the streetlight. The same one that had arrived 10 minutes too late. Its headlights flickered once, then went dark. Michael had returned, and this time he wasn't here to watch, he was here to end it. The neighborhood had gone dark long before night officially fell. Streetlights flickered, motion sensors blinked nervously, and the usual warm glow behind the windows of Westwood Pines had been replaced by the cold shimmer of fear. What had once been a community of pride was now a wasteland of silence. The only sound left was the faint hum of a pickup truck engine, idling beneath a street lamp at the end of Cedar Lane. Inside that truck sat Michael Jenkins, motionless, calm, and focused, a man not driven by anger anymore but by design. He wasn't here for violence. He was here for something far worse: reckoning. Across the street, in her fortress of paranoia, Karen Whitmore sat trembling in the corner of her living room. The once pristine home she'd boasted about in every HOA meeting was now a disarray of locked doors, covered mirrors, and broken nerves. She had been awake for days. The walls that once made her feel powerful now felt like prison bars. Her phone never stopped buzzing: news anchors, hate mail, legal notices, even death threats. She had stopped answering. Her husband had left days ago, fleeing to stay with family after being served with subpoenas. Now she was alone, and for the first time in her life she wasn't in control. That evening something began to change inside her house. The electricity flickered, the thermostat reset itself, her phone screen flashed strange notifications she didn't understand. Michael had quietly slipped into her digital world, hacking her security systems, rerouting her power grid. Every noise, every flicker, every whisper of movement now felt alive, watching, mocking, judging. Karen called the police again, demanding a patrol. But when they arrived, there was nothing. No evidence of tampering, no suspect, no trespasser, just the same black pickup truck parked in the shadows, unseen by anyone except her. She tried to tell them. Tried to explain that he was watching her, that he wanted her to lose her mind before he took her life. But they didn't believe her. They called it stress, trauma, guilt manifesting as paranoia. When they left, she slammed the door and locked every bolt twice. Outside, rain began to fall, slow, deliberate drops against the glass, tapping like fingers. That's when the power went out. The house plunged into darkness. Karen stumbled through the halls, her flashlight trembling in her hands, breathing fast, muttering to herself. The beam of light cut across her family photos: perfect smiles, perfect vacations, a perfect life, all lies now. And then she saw it. On the mirror near the front door, something was written faintly in the condensation left by her own breath. Just one word: justice. She gasped, dropped the flashlight, and backed away, heart racing. When she turned, her security cameras flickered on their own, every screen showing static, then a single image: Ethan's ramp, rebuilt and gleaming under the rain. Karen screamed, unplugging the monitors, but they stayed on. She could see movement, a shadow standing at the edge of the ramp, unmoving, silent, just watching. She turned toward the window, but there was no one there. Outside, the truck engine finally stopped. Silence wrapped the neighborhood like a suffocating blanket. Michael stepped out. He didn't wear his uniform, he didn't carry weapons, he didn't need them. The man himself was enough: calm, deliberate, the embodiment of the consequences she had evaded for too long. He walked across the street in silence, his boots splashing in shallow puddles. The rain fell harder, drumming on rooftops, mooting everything else. Inside, Karen saw movement on her porch. Her breath caught in her throat. She reached for the phone, but her hands were shaking too badly to dial. The porch light flickered once, twice, then steadied, revealing the outline of a man standing in the rain. He didn't knock, he didn't speak. He simply placed something on her welcome mat and turned away. When she finally dared to open the door, her eyes widened. It was a small wooden box, soaked and dark from the rain. Inside was a folded photo: Ethan smiling in his wheelchair. Model plane, the same one he used to wave as his father left for training. Next to it lay her own HOA violation notice, the one she had written, signed, and delivered to their mailbox months before. At the bottom, written in black ink, were 3 words: "Your rules, my turn." Karen dropped the box and fell to her knees. The photo lay in the rain, bleeding ink as water pooled around it. For the next several days, Michael didn't return. But Karen's world continued to unravel without him lifting a finger. Her house was vandalized not by him but by people she once controlled. The residents of Westwood Pines wanted retribution of their own. Her car tires were slashed, her yard was littered with rotten food. Murderer was spray painted on her fence. Everywhere she turned she saw Ethan's face, on news banners, on social media, on her own conscience. But Michael wasn't finished. He wanted her to understand the full measure of what she had taken, not just life but innocence, peace, and humanity. Late one night she received an email, no sender, no subject line, just a single video attachment. She hesitated before clicking. The video opened to grainy footage from a body camera. Michael's. He was standing at a military memorial site, his uniform immaculate, his voice steady. It wasn't addressed to her but to his son. He spoke of honor, of sacrifice. Promises kept. And then, as the wind howled through the trees behind him, he said the words that froze her blood. Forgiveness is a choice, justice is a duty. The screen went black. Karen's composure finally shattered. She screamed until her voice broke, throwing the laptop across the room. She ran to her bedroom, barricading herself behind furniture, whispering Ethan's name over and over as if trying to undo what she had done. But outside, under the veil of rain, Michael stood once more by the rebuilt ramp, his son's memorial glowing softly from a single light. He wasn't looking at Karen's house. He was looking beyond it into the distance, as though watching the past itself burn away. He didn't hate her anymore. Hate was fleeting. What he felt now was colder, the calm of a man who had finished a mission, who had seen the cost of cruelty, and who had returned it in kind. Inside, Karen sat huddled in darkness, surrounded by everything she had built collapsing inward. The hunter had stopped moving. The haunted had nowhere left to run. The neighborhood slept uneasily, sensing that something final had shifted in the air, something irreversible. And as the rain eased and dawn began to rise over Westwood Pines, Michael Jenkins walked back to his truck, closed the door, and drove away without looking back. The war was over, or so everyone thought. Because some debts aren't paid by fear. They're paid by truth. And the truth about what really happened to Ethan, the part no one yet knew, was about to come to light. Dawn broke over Westwood Pines like a bruised purple cloud, swollen and heavy, pressing down on a neighborhood that no longer dared to breathe. The storm had passed, but the air still carried that strange metallic scent that lingers after lightning, the smell of something burned, something changed. Karen Whitmore hadn't been seen in 2 days. Her house remained dark, the blinds sealed tight, mail piling on the porch. To the outside world she had vanished, consumed by her own guilt, her own terror. But to Michael Jenkins her silence wasn't closure, it was a clue, because soldiers knew one thing better than anyone: quiet never meant peace. It meant someone was hiding. Michael sat at his kitchen table, the faint hum of his laptop the only sound in the house. His face was tired, lined with sleepless nights and the cold precision of a mind that couldn't rest. Before him was a folder, digital and physical, filled with everything he had uncovered about the HOA, about Karen, about her network of corruption. But buried within those files, in the fine print of one of the older city inspection reports, something didn't add up. The ramp, the same one Karen destroyed, had already been approved by the city 6 months prior. Stamped, cleared. Signed by a safety inspector named Harold Denton. But according to records, Harold had filed a complaint against that same ramp weeks later, using Karen's name. It was impossible. Why would a city inspector file his own complaint under someone else's authority? And why had the HOA covered it up? Michael's instincts began to sharpen. He reached out to old contacts, men and women who owed him favors from a world most civilians would never know. Within hours he had the truth. Harold Denton wasn't just a safety inspector. He was Karen's brother-in-law, listed under a different last name. The permit forgery, the false violations, the HOA fines, it had all been coordinated, but there was more. The security footage from the day Ethan died had always shown one perspective, the neighbor's doorbell camera. But Michael obtained another angle that had never been released. It came from the HOA's own maintenance cam, hidden, forgotten, still feeding data to a private cloud server. When he decrypted it, the truth unfolded frame by frame, cold and mechanical. Karen hadn't acted alone. Behind her, moments before she shoved the wheelchair, another figure appeared, a man in city maintenance uniform, holding a clipboard. Harold Denton. He was inspecting the property that day. He watched the confrontation unfold. He didn't intervene. He didn't call for help. He simply turned, wrote something on his clipboard, and walked away as Ethan fell. And the timestamp, the detail that twisted the knife, showed that the inspection had been scheduled by the HOA itself. Karen hadn't gone there by chance. She planned it. She wanted Ethan's ramp gone, and she wanted witnesses to justify it as enforcement. But she hadn't planned for it to end in death. Michael leaned back in his chair, the video replaying in silence, his jaw clenched, his pulse steady. The truth wasn't vengeance, it was validation. His instincts had been right. This wasn't a tragic outburst, it was premeditation. He copied the footage onto a flash drive and stared at it for a long time. Then, for the first time since Ethan's death, he picked up his phone and called the authorities. He wasn't going to hide anymore, not from them, not from her. This wasn't just his war now, it was evidence, and it belonged to the world. By afternoon, the police arrived, quietly, unmarked cars rolling through the cracked calm of Westwood Pines. Reporters swarmed soon after, tipped off by anonymous emails. Within hours, the video hit every local news network. The narrative changed instantly. No longer was Karen a woman accused of negligence. She was now part of a criminal conspiracy. The forged inspections, the coordinated harassment, the misuse of HOA funds, all tied together in a chain that led straight to city officials. The dominoes began to fall. Harold Denton was arrested at his office. His computers were seized, his emails exposed, each one a breadcrumb leading to Karen. The messages showed their coordination, their shared disdain for rule breakers and non-compliant residents. One message, dated the week before Ethan's death, read, "The ramp needs to go, he's setting a precedent, handle it before it spreads." Michael didn't have to say a word, the truth was doing all the talking. But amid the flood of coverage and outrage, Michael felt no triumph. The deeper he looked, the more he realized how many people had known, how many had turned away. HOA members who'd attended meetings where Ethan's name was mocked. Neighbors who'd witnessed Karen's abuse but stayed silent. City employees who ignored forged reports for favors. It wasn't just Karen's crime, it was collective cowardice. That night, as the neighborhood watched the news unfold, Michael stood alone at Ethan's rebuilt ramp. The porch light glowed faintly, reflecting off the wet boards. The memorial plaque caught the light for Ethan, forever home. He wondered if his son could see what was happening, if justice could ever truly balance loss. Then in the distance, flashing red and blue lights painted the night, police cars pulling up to Karen's house. She didn't resist. When the officers led her out, her hair unkempt, her eyes hollow, the entire street stood watching. No one spoke, no one intervened. The same people who once feared her now looked at her with disgust and maybe a hint of shame. As she was placed into the squad car, her gaze drifted toward Michael standing across the street. Their eyes met through the rain and glass, no words, no gestures, just the unbearable weight of everything she had taken from him. For the first time, she didn't look angry. She looked small, defeated. When the car drove away, Michael didn't follow. He just stood there unmoving as the night reclaimed the street. The thunder had stopped, the air was still, but something inside him knew this wasn't the end. Karen might be gone, but rot like that didn't start and stop with one person. It grew from the soil of privilege, apathy, and unchecked power. And Michael wasn't sure he could leave it alone anymore, because justice wasn't just about one life lost, it was about the system that allowed it to happen. And as the headlines screamed her name the next morning, HOA President Arrested in child's death cover-up, Michael Jenkins made a quiet decision. He would make sure Westwood Pines never forgot Ethan, not through vengeance, through remembrance, through change, through truth. And if anyone ever tried to bury that truth again, they'd have to face him first. The courtroom was silent. Not the kind of silence that begged for peace, but the kind that felt heavy, suffocating, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Outside, the world had already made its judgment. News vans lined the courthouse steps, their antennas stabbing at the sky like bayonets. Protesters held signs demanding justice, accountability, change. But inside, it wasn't noise that ruled. It was consequence. Karen Whitmore sat at the defense table, wrists bound, her once pristine posture gone. The woman who had terrorized an entire neighborhood now looked like a ghost of her own arrogance. Her lawyers whispered, shuffled papers, avoided her eyes. Across the aisle sat Michael Jenkins, straight-backed, unflinching, the uniform gone but the presence still unmistakable. He wasn't there for revenge anymore. He was there to witness the end of what had started on that broken porch. The evidence had been overwhelming. The video, the emails, the falsified inspection reports. The HOA's financial manipulation. Every thread led back to Karen, her greed, her pride, her cruelty. And behind her, a network of silent accomplices who'd allowed it all to thrive. But this day wasn't about them. It was about Ethan. The prosecutor's closing statement echoed like gunfire. Karen's hatred had cost a boy his life. Her power, unchecked and protected by bureaucracy, had turned a community into a battlefield. And Michael, the father she underestimated, had exposed it all. When the verdict came, the air fractured. Guilty on all counts: manslaughter, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, falsification of city documents. Karen didn't cry, she didn't speak, her expression didn't even shift when the judge sentenced her to 20 years without parole. But Michael saw it, the flicker behind her eyes, not regret, recognition. She knew she had lost to something bigger than herself. Justice wasn't loud, it didn't explode, it simply arrived. Weeks passed. The HOA dissolved under court order. Properties were turned over to the city. Members resigned, some facing charges of their own. The Westwood Pines sign, the proud, manicured emblem that once welcomed residents into conformity, was taken down. In its place, Michael built something different, a memorial park, small, quiet, built where the old HOA office once stood. There was no ceremony, no speeches. Just a single bronze plaque beneath a spreading oak tree. For Ethan, may compassion be stronger than control. The town changed slowly after that. Neighbors who'd once avoided each other began talking again. The fear that had gripped the community loosened, replaced with something raw but real: accountability. People mowed each other's lawns, helped rebuild fences, donated to disabled children's programs in Ethan's name. Michael didn't seek fame, though it found him anyway. News stations called him the Navy SEAL who took down an HOA. Online forums turned his story into legend, part cautionary tale, part vigilante myth. But Michael ignored it all. He spent his days rebuilding his home piece by piece in quiet honor of the life that had filled it. Sometimes late at night he'd walk the perimeter of the yard the way he used to patrol in foreign deserts. But this time there was no enemy, just echoes, the wind through the trees, the creak of Ethan's rebuilt ramp. The world moving on, yet deep down Michael knew he'd never truly lay down his burden, because justice wasn't permanent, it was something you had to protect. One evening, as the sun set behind the memorial, Michael stood before the plaque and placed his hand against the cold metal. His reflection shimmered against the bronze, fractured and golden. In that quiet he made his final oath. Never again would he let power trample the helpless. Never again would silence protect cruelty. He wasn't a soldier anymore, but he was still a guardian. And for the first time since that terrible day, Michael allowed himself to breathe not as a man haunted by loss but as one reborn through purpose. Months later, letters began arriving at his doorstep, handwritten, typed, from strangers across the country, parents of disabled children, veterans who'd lost faith in the system, people who'd suffered under corrupt HOAs. Abusive neighbors or cruel institutions. They all said the same thing: your story gave us courage. And though Michael never replied, he read every single one, because each word was proof that Ethan's death hadn't been in vain. His story had sparked something that laws and headlines never could: empathy. The kind that changes communities. The kind that rebuilds hearts. Years passed and the scars of Westwood Pines became its lessons. The neighborhood never returned to what it was, it became something better. The HOA model was rewritten statewide. New policies protected the vulnerable. Power had been humbled. Karen Whitmore remained behind bars, forgotten by all but the justice system. In her silence her name faded, but Ethan's didn't. Every year on the anniversary of his death, neighbors gathered at the park. They laid flowers, told stories, and watched as the ramp lights flickered on at dusk, a quiet tribute that glowed like hope against the dark. And somewhere under that same sky, Michael stood in the distance, hands in his pockets, watching. He didn't need to be seen, he just needed to know that the world had learned, because his mission had never been revenge, it had been restoration. A broken ramp had become a symbol, a tragedy had become a movement, and one father's grief had become the reason others found their voice. As the camera of fate pulled away from that quiet, rebuilt neighborhood, roofs glinting under the sun, wind rustling the oak leaves, Michael Jenkins turned toward the open road beyond. The soldier in him was done fighting, but the father in him would never stop protecting. And as the scene faded, the world remembered the story that started it all, a story born in tragedy, fueled by justice, and finished with a promise: no one hurts the innocent and walks away.